Coming up, the Giants bid a farewell to a familiar running back face, putting even more pressure on one Devin Singletary to perform as the lead back. But who fills in the room behind him? Plus, what's Darren Waller been up to away from football? Not to mention setting up the table for the wide receiver room, Darius Slayton sticking around, and what to expect as the post-June 1 date looms large for Big Blue and the entire NFL. We get into it next. Yes, my friends. It is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your host. Over here, Adam Arbrecht. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise. We're talking about everything on the offensive side of the football today. And we also let you know, of course, that this episode today is brought to you by Pietential, Pietential. Pietential is an online wellness assessment free for individual users, sets a baseline for your wellness, gives you tools to improve over time, and tracks your progress. You want to be the best? You got to work at it. So go ahead and check out Pietential today, where you can continue to improve your well-being. And Andy, we're going to continue to try to improve the New York Football Giants. They make moves in the running back room. A fond farewell to one Gary Brightwell, something we maybe should have seen coming, even if it was a little bit sooner than expected.
Yeah, it's funny. We talked about how we wanted to discuss the running back room, and we were going to talk about Gary Brightwell and what his role could be, knowing that the room is pretty crowded. And then funny thing happens right before we start recording. Gary Brightwell ends up being released. But the writing was on the wall after you look at knowing that he's from a previous regime. They didn't really give him many carries in the offensive backfield, and he really only had a role in special teams. And the sign they had, the defensive back has special teams work with the Steelers previously. It's kind of a like for like switch out, knowing that he really didn't have any offensive value. Very tough. I think Gary Brightwell is going to pick up. He's going to get picked up by another team relatively quickly. But you're already starting to see that this room is taking shape, and it's fully revamped with some of the new players that this new regime and Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll have brought in.
Yeah, Riley being the immediate addition there to get into camp and just put him in the mix there, another body, as we say, when it comes to off seasons and working towards training camp. You mentioned Gary Brightwell. Listen, 2022, 31 carries, 141 yards, right? And you just said, okay, maybe there's a little something there. Only had 8 targets in terms of the passing game, but then it fell off a cliff the next season. You mentioned he settled into a special teams role. But I think maybe what you also look at in that regard is when we talk about some of these guys, maybe we'll mention on another episode Darnay Holmes and where his status kind of is. Over the course of the Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll regime, the more that you hear old holdover players maybe sliding down the depth chart a little bit, settling into contributing roles in other facets of the game, it's probably an indicator that it's a slow burn looking for replacements, right? And by the way, Gary Brightwell was a back-end roster guy to begin with, so it's not like it should really shock anybody. What it really does, though, is put the spotlight into this running back room. Obviously, Devin Singletary is going to be the featured back here. When you take out Gary Brightwell, at least from an experience standpoint, you've now lost another body that had been in the NFL for a handful of years. What are the expectations for Devin Singletary? And I know that you want to do a little, it's not a comp, but a little reflection, comparing him in some aspects to one Saquon Barkley.
Well, I think it's important to know that we lost the all-pro, all-world gold jacket wearing running back in the room. And, the simple answer is to say it's a like-for-like replacement. We lost Saquon Barkley. We brought in Devin Singletary. And while some stats do favor the Giants in that regard with having Devin Singletary, obviously it's tough to be able to replace a player like Saquon Barkley who has so many different explosive plays. But I will do my best, Adam. So what should Giant fans be expecting? Well, you should not be expecting the same home run hitting ability that Saquon Barkley had out of Devin Singletary. That is very, very clear. What you will be expecting is, one, a guy that's 6 months younger, a guy that has almost 30% less carries in the NFL, so probably has a little bit fresher legs. And you're talking about a guy that averages about $5.5 million annually as opposed to Saquon Barkley's 13-ish and change range. So you're talking about at least half the cost, a little bit younger. And last year averaged 0.3 yards per carry more than Saquon Barkley. Over his entire career has averaged 0.3 yards over Saquon Barkley. So it's been consistent. Adam, the most noteworthy stat that I have in his favor is essentially the fact that when you look at tackles for loss, Saquon
Hmm.
Barkley led the league, the entire NFL, in tackles for loss with 38 tackles for a loss. Devin Singletary, on the other hand, only had 19 tackles for a loss, double the amount of yardage per loss. We mentioned Saquon Barkley is a home run hitter, and sometimes that results in 2nd and 12, 3rd and
Of
9s,
course.
because we're not picking up and just taking the yards that are available. Because Devin Singletary isn't the athlete that Saquon Barkley is, you can look for a guy that is going to see the first hole, hit the first hole, and try to gain those 4 yards, tough yardage that maybe Saquon Barkley would be looking for the home run on more often than not.
Yeah, if you're talking about a player in Devin Singletary, talking about a Giants team offensively, then we know you brought in Malik Neighbors, the health of Daniel Jones, all this stuff, right? But we want to try to have consistency at some critical points on the offensive side of the ball. We're not saying that Devin Singletary is going to be better than Saquon Barkley, but for where the Giants are as a franchise, this is why it always was. Don't draft Saquon Barkley. Why? Because the team stinks. Like, don't bring in a running back behind a crap offensive line. You talk about those tackles for a loss. We know how bad the offensive line was for the New York Football Giants. However, go down to Houston, where Devin Singletary played a year ago. That was an offensive line that had a lot of injuries. Now, of course, they get CJ Stroud, and it's this dynamic playmaker at the QB spot. Nico Collins mentioned him the other day in his contract, right? So a lot of things were going in the right direction for them down there. But what you like about it for Devin Singletary is I'm going to get the yards that are in front of me. Like that's my goal here, as often as possible, to take those chunk plays. And I looked up the stat the other day. I'll be a little bit off the mark here, but percentage wise, when we talk about first down runs, you want to have 40% of the time gaining at least 4 yards in order to put yourself in a good position for 2nd and 3rd down and trying to convert. Devin Singletary for his career is a career 47% on first downs. So it means I maybe I could bounce outside like Saquon Barkley loves to want to do, or any of the elite players do. Devin Singletary says, I want to make sure that when I walk back to the huddle on 2nd down, we're in a position where we can run the ball again if we want to, where we can try to have a little quick slant route, where we can take a deep shot and still be in a good position. So not nearly the same caliber of player, but you hope it offers consistency when you bring in your new elite caliber player in Malik Neighbors. That's the weapon X. You just need Singletary to keep you down in distance, the classic phrase, ahead of schedule.
Yeah, and Adam, we talk about what Devin Singletary brings. The biggest difference, we talked about the explosive playmaking ability that Saquon had. That is not Devin Singletary's game. That is not in his bag. The prime example of that is 20 plus yard rushes last season. Saquon Barkley had 12 of those where he broke
Okay.
off big chunk explosive plays. Devin Singletary only had 3. He is not the guy that is going to go out there and make explosive plays, which is why when Giant fans are thinking about what this running back room is going to look like, you have to look past Devin Singletary and think about the complement of the other players in the room. Who are the other players that may be bringing explosive plays, catches out of the backfield? The Giants need to complement Devin Singletary's skill set, because Saquon Barkley was multifaceted. He was the explosive Swiss Army knife. That is not what Devin Singletary is. The Giants really will have a running back by committee room, and that means that the rest of the players that are going to be in there are equally as important as Devin Singletary.
Devin Singletary, I have a smirk on my face. Ask me this again when we get to the wide receiver conversation. But coming to the league with Buffalo in 2019, 151 carries, 156, 188, 177, career high 216 last year with the Houston Texans, career high 898 yards with the Houston Texans. Not going to be a big weapon out of the backfield in terms of receiving, though he did catch 30 balls, 38. So you can expect something from him. But I think if you're the Giants, you wouldn't hate taking it out of their hands. And that's why, as we turn our attention to the rest of this backfield, we're going to talk about some fringe guys here to watch for. Obviously, no more Gary Brightwell. But first and foremost, Tyrone Tray Jr., I think you and I are both on the same page that he's the guy that you want set up as the number 2, because he can handle the rock, but also he gives you this pass catching ability that I think complements Singletary's skill set too.
Yeah, keep in mind Tyrone Tracy is a converted wide receiver into a running back position, so he understands one-on-one matchups, how to get out in space, how to make people miss. An interesting trait. It is one that the Giants obviously sought out, knowing that he was a great complement to what Devin Singletary does. Keep in mind, I also think he has the value in special teams. We talk about the changes in kick returning. One of the things
Yes.
that they really like about Tracy is the fact that it fits perfectly in terms of his skill set to be able to return these kicks. Adam, with the new kickoff rules, the difference between everything is last year about 30 kicks were returned per team per year. This year they're expecting it to be 100. So it's almost 3 times the amount of kicks being returned. The Giants obviously had a disaster in special teams and punt and kick return last year. It feels like Tyrone Tracy not only fills the pass catching ability out of the backfield, but really has an ability to start week 1 in the return game as well.
No, of course, and that's an interesting factor. Now, you weren't talking about Gary Brightwell as being the sole. We know we have Gunner obviously back there as well. They also brought in Isaiah McKenzie in the wide receiver room. These guys are going to be candidates for that role too. But I'll be in. So what I'll be interested in is, like Tyrone Tracy Jr. feels like he's the lead to be the lead backup, but also special teams value, like you mentioned. Then you get into, if you think about a year ago, this is a team that had 4 running backs. That's 4 running backs with Saquon Barkley on the team. It seems like the premise of, well, they'll carry 4 again, unless you see other positional value across your roster, of course. But if we think they could carry 4 running backs, taking Gary Brightwell and his special teams value out of the equation, well, now all of a sudden you're talking about your boy Turbo Miller. You're talking about Eric Gray, who was underwhelming a year ago. And then you're also talking about Jashaun Corbin to go along with Riley that they brought in here. But what do you see after Devin Singletary, after Tyrone Tracy Jr.? Do you feel like it's an open competition going into camp? My sense would be yes, because all of these guys are either undrafted free agents or late round picks. So there's no reason why anybody gets a better seat at the table. And I'll be really curious how a player, I'll mention like Eric Gray. I'm just curious. I'm not bullish. I'm curious how he performs this offseason, because I think it's a tough spot to be in as a rookie, bad offensive line, and asked to do special teams things that they never should have a year ago.
Yeah, so Eric Gray in OTAs, they already were giving him first team reps
Yep.
with the ones in OTAs. Take that for whatever it may mean. I mean, if you think about it, Devin Singletary is a veteran. He doesn't need the wear and tear on his tires. And everyone else is basically an undrafted or a late round free agent, has never had a snap in the NFL. It makes a ton of sense for Eric Gray to be with the ones. So I'm not reading too far into it. I am surprised that Gary Brightwell got released so early in this process. It really kind of showed probably that, one, they have respect for Gary Brightwell, want him to be able to have as much time to catch on with another team. But I think they already have the picture of what they hope OTAs and training camp informs them of. And to me, as you mentioned before, I love Turbo Miller. Dante Miller, to me, is the guy that is a game changer in this backfield, Adam. Right? You just cannot teach the speed that he has. A 4.27 40 is a guy that completely changes the dynamic. Tyrone Tracy's a 4.48 guy. I think Devin Singletary ran a 4.6, so he's clearly not a speed guy. Turbo Miller changes the complexion of this room by having that like athleticism and breakaway speed. And the other thing I will say, Adam, that I think is fascinating is Turbo Miller was available to the Giants not through the draft because of weird NCAA rules. And did he have eligibility? Did he not? It would be fascinating to think about, would the Giants have had to use a 4th or a 5th round pick on Turbo Miller to bring him into this room? And if so, if Turbo Miller and Tyrone Tracy were there for the Giants in the 4th or 5th round, would they have picked Tyrone Tracy over Miller? I think, things like that are fascinating to me.
Yeah, that is the one part of it. You mentioned the speed, and obviously, for when you look in this running back room, that like he comes in with that unique skill set. Hey, nobody else can run as fast as I can, so it does give you a different dynamic. And you try to think about, hey, is there a player that I could bring in for one home run hit here a handful of times? That would be beneficial for the New York Football Giants, obviously. And the part about the draft piece is very interesting, and I think maybe we'll actually spend some time this offseason and in camp looking at, well, where would his ratings kind of have ranked him? Can we develop a RAS score here relative to some other people? Can we go ahead and look and say, whether it was the Giants or otherwise, somebody would have taken a look at Turbo Miller in the draft had he been eligible? So that's a big factor here too. We know he's an undrafted free agent or a player that was outright signed. Where would he have ranked among the running backs in this draft class? It does make for a fascinating camp, obviously. We'll keep our eye on it. Like I say, when you take away a player that's been with the organization for a few years in Gary Brightwell, at a minimum, it just says, hey, we brought in a guy we're familiar with in Devin Singletary. Now everybody else sorted out for us. And that also includes a player like Jashaun Corbin. I'll give a little footnote on him coming up here in a second before we turn our attention to the wide receiver room and Darius Slayton trying to earn a little extra coin. And again, what the heck is Darren Waller up to? We'll get to that in just one moment. All right, so as we continue the oh boy, I came so close there. Buddy, when you do double duty some days, you think about talking about the Brooklyn Nets. We can get into the draft for them if we want to at some point too. as we continue the One Giant podcast. Just a quick footnote in that backfield for Jashaun Corbin. They brought him back in. I mentioned this briefly in another episode. I want to reiterate it. He came into the league at 201, 202 pounds. He's 220 now. He has good speed, but not different levels and gears to his speed. He was always regarded as a physical back coming out. So I look at him now and I think Gary Brightwell, who was 220 pounds, by the way, now Jashaun Corbin has a bit of an inside track here, maybe to be one of the backup physical backs here. If they're keeping 4 running backs, and we believe in obviously Devin Singletary, obviously Tyrone Tray Jr., Turbo Miller, maybe you're right. Like maybe he's deserving of it. At that point, you're talking about, though, that 4th spot, if you're going to carry one, Jashaun Corbin, Eric Gray. And it's just interesting because we know Corbin brought in, let go, got released, and they got him right back into the roster a year ago. Maybe only, ultimately lands on the practice squad again. But I find actually that back end couple of players very interesting if we're thinking about footprints this season for long-term future down the road, because Devin Singletary is not going to be your bell cow back for 5 years.
Yeah, keep in mind, Devin Singletary on a 3-year deal. It's really a 2-year deal because the dead cap after 2 years is only $1.2 million at him. So the investment that the Giants had to put in Devin Singletary is really a kind of a 2-year commitment. Couple that with Saquon Barkley, where after 2 years, if they cut him, it's an $8.7 million cap hit. Significantly different when we talk about the money and what's involved. They need Saquon Barkley to be there for 3 years. The Giants could move off of Devin Singletary after 2 with little commitment. I will. The one thing I will say is Eric Gray comes in about 212, so he's a little bit on the bigger side.
A little bigger.
I think that you're really starting to see the running back room really clear up, Adam. To me, tying a bow on the running back room, it feels like Devin Singletary will be there. Tyrone Tracy will be that pass catcher out of the backfield. Turbo Miller, the change of pace back, and I think the Giants, after drafting him in the 5th round last year, want Eric Gray on this roster and feel like he may have not gotten a fair shake. That would leave Jashaun Corbin on the practice squad, which is where he kind of lived for last season. To me, I think that's what the Giants are hoping for. But hey, I don't think anyone is fully solidified in terms of those last few guys. Jashaun Corbin, if he has an amazing camp, could vault ahead of one of them and get that last roster spot.
Yeah, it's fascinating, man. I'm pulling for Eric Gray too, because again, I feel bad for any young player that comes into a bad offensive system and setup and is not put in a position to have success at all. So I feel bad for him. And we talk about Tyrone Tracy, pass catching ability. Maybe talk about Eric Gray between the tackles. They can be a 2-headed backup monster potentially. But hey, get young bodies in the camp, have them all sorted out, and have them hopefully come up with a complementary system. We'll talk about it as camp continues. The other narrative coming out here, obviously, was in the wide receiver room. Darius Slayton, he wants to get paid. So there's a bit of a double dip here. The first part is Field Yates updates after Jordan Renan initially reported that they had improved the incentives for the upcoming season for Darius Slayton. Originally, as Field Yates outlines, Darius Slayton had a $1.5 million available incentive package coming into the year. That is now $2.15 million in incentives. So he increases effectively the ability to earn up to an additional $650,000. Now, I think this is a good faith gesture from the Giants because they don't have to do anything with him. They don't have to trade him. They don't have to give him a new contract. They're like, hey, if you think you're going to succeed, we'll try to put a little bit extra money in your pocket. Does that ultimately feel insignificant, though? If we're talking about the gap between, regardless of how you feel as a fan, production-wise, Darius Slayton should be in line, and we have another reference point here to talk about, in line for more money. And they're like, hey, well, you can get from 2.15 in incentives. It's not nothing. That is a pretty significant percentage increase overall on what you can earn.
Yeah, I mean, listen, when we talk about moving the incentives from 1.5 to 2.15, it's $650,000 basically in incentives. Adam, he only reaches those incentives if he ends up hitting career highs in things like receptions at 70, yards over 1,000, touchdowns double digits at 10. He really would have to have the type of year that the Giants would gladly pay a bunch of incentives for him to be able to reach. If Darius Slayton has 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns, like, the Giants will do everything to be able to pay him incentives. And so for me, it is a sign of good faith. They wanted him to come in. They wanted him to be a veteran presence in the room, knowing that there aren't that many veteran leaders other than Allen Robinson in that wide receiver room. But yeah, you could tell that Darius Slayton isn't overall pleased with the resolution. It was the best he could get. And his agent probably turned and said, we have no leverage. Unless you want to like sit out and ask for a trade, this is the best situation we're going to get. He took it, being the consummate pro that Slayton is. It feels like it's an acknowledgement that we didn't have to do anything. We gave you a little bit more. Now go out and prove it on the field. But you hear about all these other wide receiver contracts, Adam, and it even furthers like Darius Slayton looking around being like, why am I being ignored here?
Yeah, so that's the part of it here. Now, the nice thing about this from a Giants perspective is this still makes Darius Slayton a viable trade candidate if you feel like other players, obviously Malik Neighbors, but also Wan'Dale Robinson, also Jalen Hyatt, also any number of these other players inside the wide receiver room, even if Isaiah Hodgins proves to be a little bit consistent or Bryce Ford Reeton shows up in this camp, you can still move them, and other teams would look and say, wow, that's a very reasonable contract to bring in a player that catches 55-ish balls a season, over 750 yards, and gets you a couple of touchdowns. But restricted free agent, as reported by Adam Schefter, Jawan Jennings is signing a 2-year deal with the 49ers worth up to $15.4 million, including $10.5 million guaranteed. The deal was negotiated and confirmed by agents Drew and Jason Rosenhaus. He did not sign his free agent tender and instead did this deal, which is akin to a 1-year extension. When you hear a number like that, up to 15.4 million, and then we know where the contract stands for Darius Slayton, do you look at that and go, right, like this is why Darius Slayton just looks around and sees more money going more places, and ultimately it's kind of the, well, I guess, signee beware, because you sign the little mini extension with the Giants for security and immediately probably had remorse around that, seeing how the market went.
Yeah, I'd say so, considering Juwan Jennings had a whopping 19 receptions last season, and he's going to be getting paid more money than Darius Slayton is. Like you have to feel for Slayton in this regard, where he is more accomplished, more explosive, has more production, yet is making less money. Jennings had been tendered at the second round level, kind of created a restricted free agent for him. He would have, if he would have signed it, it would have been $4.89 million, which would have been less than Darius Slayton. In this new
Yep.
deal where it's worth up to $15.4 million with $10.5 million guaranteed, that averages out to about $7.5 million a year, more than what Darius Slayton is getting. And you can see that he's saying, like, whether or not you think Juwan Jennings is better than me or has more upside, the fact that
Right.
he's getting paid more than me after not doing as much is the reason why Darius Slayton was holding out to begin with. You see these contracts for Nico Collins. You see these contracts for Jalen Waddle. You see that wide receiver twos are now getting $25 million to $28 million a year. Darius Slayton sitting here saying, I'm a 3, which at least should get me, what, $8 million, $10 million? Like, he feels like he's owed it, and he's not necessarily wrong, but this is the rub, Adam, right? If you sign the deal for security on your end as a player, then to turn around and say, well, I want more money, it's like it's a difficult balancing act between the organization and the player. Who wants security? Who wants to have your rights for a couple of years? And Darius Slayton just falls into this no man's land for 1 year, where it's like he has to play for less than he's valued for, and the Giants don't really need to do anything about it.
Right. That's the unfortunate part about it. It's not about whether or not he's a good player, good teammate, all those, all those other things. These like extra narratives get heaped onto it. Nothing to do with it. And it's not about the organization saying, oh, you don't appreciate the draft pick that you brought in. Now he's a holdover, but he's been productive. You've seen those clips from Dable at camp. He's like, hey, remember a year ago, you couldn't even get on the field that much. Look at you now. It's like, the team wants him to do well. And guess what? They want him to do well because there's a value on the contract. And if he's productive and it doesn't cost them as much, that's a benefit for them. So all these things do play a big factor in here. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with him this season. You mentioned those benchmarks, 70, 1,010. Boy, I'll put it this way. Giants fans everywhere will be rejoicing and championing Darius Slayton to go on from the Giants eventually and get a massive contract somewhere else if he pulls down those types of numbers and hits those incentive marks, because it means that defenses were terrified about what Malik Neighbors could do to them. It means that Daniel Jones was having a good season. It means that the offense was being productive. So that, at the end of the day, is what matters most when it comes to that. Before we turn our attention and remind everybody about the impending post-June 1 and what that could mean for the New York Football Giants and the league at large. Go ahead, Andy. We're going to have some fancy graphics as we move through the offseason and get towards the regular season for a new segment. Sometimes we have Andy's Bet of the Week. This is going to be Andy's off-topic and on social. One Darren Waller, still thinking about what he's going to do in terms of retirement, but is also, and I don't mean this, I'm not poking fun at him, he has had some things go on in his personal life. I will poke fun at the fact that the way that he has vented about that is through music videos, and they are what I would call not great.
Well, Adam, this will be the test. We want the OGP listeners to give us feedback. I like some of the off field tabloid page 6 type of things, and this is where it kind of falls into the Darren Waller piece. Obviously, it was announced that he was divorcing his wife, Kelsey Plum, WNBA superstar. And he decided to release an album, a track with a video for his new song "Who Knew," where it's
No.
a Kelsey Plum imposter, or someone looking very
Impersonator.
similar
Sure.
to her, and Darren Waller being so overcome with emotion, and then she stabs him in the back. He's bleeding, left for dead on the beach as the waves kind of crash against his face. Well, now we know what Darren Waller has been up to for the last couple of weeks. He's obviously still in his feelings about what happened in his personal life. We talk about him being an aspiring rapper. I mean, I am totally fine with people having other passions outside of football. We
Of
have
course.
passions outside of our daily lives. And so, like, it's okay. But there's nothing that I saw from that music video that makes me think Darren Waller is coming back to the Giants and is fully locked in and committed to playing football for another season. I don't know if you have any other thoughts behind it.
No, I'm going to tell you what I told you last month. And it was, again, not being dismissive about people going through difficult times in their personal lives or having issues within their relationships, right? Like Darren Waller is going through a hard time. He got divorced. He lost his marriage. He's trying to process those feelings. All that I'm totally fine with. This comes back to solely between age, between injury, and everything else. The idea that the New York Football Giants, and especially after coming out of the draft, should sit here and be waiting with bated breath, hoping that Darren Waller is going to want to continue to play for them because they need him in this offense. Listen, would he help? Of course he would. But they don't need him in order to be successful offensively this season. They don't need him in order to continue the rebuilding process. So I personally would have said, listen, you got a lot going on off the field. We appreciate that. We also, from a football standpoint, know you've had injuries. We know you're a little bit older. We appreciate you. You've been designated for a post June 1 cut. And I won't be surprised if that ends up being the case. I think both sides have played it very vague and not, gotten into it at all. But that just makes me, again, feel a lot more like both sides kind of know what they want to do here. And it could actually be that both sides want to release you, to retire, whatever the case may be. And maybe Darren Waller ends up doing, quote unquote, right by the Giants, whatever financially makes it easiest for him still to take some money home with him, but not to hurt the franchise as he exits out the door.
Yeah, I think it's really tough. I mean, basically what I saw in that video, and maybe I shouldn't be reading too much into it, but I don't think Darren Waller necessarily needs football or wants football. There seems to be other bigger fish to fry. The tough part is, Adam, when healthy, he is a football player the Giants need. We can't, as we talked about, everyone having the hatred for Darius Slayton asking for more money. We are not having the luxury of being able to just jettison talented football players
Yeah,
because
we
the
can.
Giants are devoid of talent in a lot of areas. The issue is with me, if Darren Waller was healthy, I would have no problem with any of this. But the fact that he continually misses and has issues with his hamstring, it's literally going to hamstring the Giants from a cap perspective, holding on to a guy that's not going to be available on the field for them.
Yeah, again, like I understand what you're saying, and then you go back and look at the numbers. There was productivity there for both quarterback position and from him as tight end. You drafted Theo Johnson. I'm not telling you to walk in the door and be perfect, but you drafted him. He's ready to play for you. He's ready to contribute now. You have Daniel Bellinger. You believe in him. You can develop him. I believe in Lawrence Cager as being an athletic pass catching tight end that you can utilize there. So while none of these one players you look at and go, oh, check out the stats, they can go ahead and be better than Darren Waller. No, that's not the case. But I don't believe in Darren Waller being a non-negotiable in terms of we should wait around for him to decide what he wants to do. And then hopefully he chooses us, right? And if not, we'll pivot, we'll make different choices. And that's not just based on whether or not I think that he's the best fit or that the Giants can't replace him inside of the offense or with other players. It's also because I don't believe that the Giants in their current iteration, when we think about what are the expectations for this season, I don't think they should be coming into this season thinking, well, this is why we have to wait and hope and pray that Darren Waller wants to be a part of this organization because we have expectations X. You actually have some cover here, developing young talent, building towards what you want to look like over the next 2 and 3 seasons. That affords you to say, yep, we're going to go with young guys. We're going to continue to groom our players inside of our system and acknowledge, guess what? Maybe we made a little bit of a mistake when it came to signing Darren Waller in the first place, simply from an injury standpoint, which hurts the availability and productivity.
Ultimately, Adam, with Darren Waller uncertainty, the Giants have made as opposed to last season, the Giants have made the proper plan Bs, plan Cs by drafting an athletic player like Theo Johnson, by making sure Daniel Bellinger is ready to rock and roll.
Right.
Even if Darren Waller leaves, I think we still at least have options in the room. I wouldn't be surprised for them to maybe bring in a veteran at the veteran vested minimum at that point. But the Giants are okay. I hope Darren Waller is also okay.
Yes. So give us your feedback. Andy would love to do a little social. He'd like to have a little social corner during the off season, especially, but even in the regular season, sometimes high fashion leading up to Sunday football. Let us know in the comments about that. Coming back here in a second, we set the table for the post June 1 and rumors around cut candidates around the league that could be intriguing for the New York Football Giants. Get into that in just one moment. All right, as we tie the OGP bow on this episode, we look over to post June 1, the opportunity. And he set the table in terms of what the value is for the NFL, what the value is for teams, and why a lot of guys end up not from a talent standpoint, but from a money standpoint, hitting the open market on post June 1.
Yeah, so obviously the NFL has a designation called the post June 1 release for different players or sign or whatever it may be. The reason why the NFL does this is twofold. One, if the team knows that they are going to release a player and they know that the June 1 date is very important because it's the start of when you can spread the cap to the next year. So instead of having it all fall now, it can move into multiple sequential years. It cannot do that before June 1. So the June 1 mechanism for NFL teams is spread the cap hit. You'd rather have 3 million on dead cap of this year and 3 million next year than 6 million today. That's the simple way of thinking about it when you're talking about dead cap post June 1 designations, things like that. On the player side, it helps them tremendously, and that's why this was all enacted, is because if the team knows that they are not going to have you on the roster and they had to hold you until June 1 to be able to make that happen, then the player loses out on months of being able to catch on with a new team, get in the new system, do all the OTAs. And also, there may be free agent dollars in March available that there are not in the middle of June. And so they have this kind of mechanism to allow the player to get released earlier to latch on with a new team and get a better free agent contract, and also allows the organization to put their hand up and say, this is my intent on June 1 to be able to move the cap the way that they should be. Each team is allowed some of these 2 post-June designations, which allows them to free up the cap space. SB Nation put out an article that the Saints are the only one that used both of them, considering they use it every year because they kick the can every single year. But it is interesting to know that, like, there are still free agents out there that have been waiting for some of these post-June designations to be able to see what the money looks like. It's interesting to see what happens with Darren Waller for the Giants, especially. But you may see some activity on the free agent market, Adam, after June 1, because June 2nd is when some of these mechanisms kick into place. Teams may have a couple million here or there to be able to allocate to some of these veteran free agents that have been waiting, who also don't really want to go through OTAs anyway. So they're perfectly fine waiting till this mechanism kicks in on June 2nd.
$11.6 million, mentioning Darren Waller. That's how much they could clear if they make him a post June 1 cut. And obviously, then you get a little bit of wiggle room around what you want to do. Also, I have to take a look here. Somebody put this up. It's like Darren Waller's projected to be like the 15th or 16th tight end in the rankings for the upcoming NFL season. That's also another good reason. Hey, listen, you need a tight end, you need to be good. But when you're talking about a top 5 tight end, that's one thing. When you're talking about a top 20 tight end, that's another conversation. But the Giants could free up money there. And you're going to want to keep your eyes and ears open. We'll be back in on Monday morning talking about it. But notably, Pro Football Network put out some interesting names to watch here. One that Andy's familiar with, as he's brought him up on this episode, this podcast a number of times this offseason. That's Courtland Sutton over with the Denver Broncos. Why? Because they can go ahead and defer $3.8 million into 2025 in dead cap and give themselves some opportunities here. We know that the Denver Broncos are an absolute mess here with all the money still lingering over them from Russell Wilson. So maybe that's something to keep an eye on for the Giants if you're looking inside the wide receiver room. James Bradbury, old Giants friend, Philadelphia Eagles, making too much money, could be a cap casualty for them. And I'll even go down to Carolina. Miles Sanders, 1 year in Carolina, already being talked about at 26, going to be actually 27, just turned years old, 5'11", 210-pounder. Top of the episode, what we talk about, running backs, how's the room going to fill out? Are these guys going to claim spots? You still want to have some experience, and maybe coupled with the injury designation release for Gary Brightwell and thinking about some of these cut candidates, I wonder if we start to have conversations about how much trust or how much confidence do the Giants have in letting Devin Singletary be the bell cow back, or do you look around the league for some reasonably priced options on the market? So those are just a few of the names that I think we're going to hear about. Whether or not the Giants get into those waters is going to depend a lot on what happens with Darren Waller and freeing up some extra cap room.
Yeah, specifically for the Giants at the end of the day, that's where they're going to be able to free up some of the cap space. You look directly at Darren Waller. There's going to be some interesting conversations around Darnay Holmes and others in camp, seeing how they're performing. And Adam, I talk about following the money all the time. That
Follow
is
that money.
going to be a narrative to watch for the Giants as we go from OTAs into training camp. You should be thinking about who has the upper hand in terms of the Giants being able to cut bait with and have no dead cap incurred versus a couple million in dead cap. While you may think that these things are superfluous or like the Giants don't care about them, they certainly do. And it may be the difference between one guy making the roster and someone else not.
Per over the cap, the Giants have $1.526 million in cap space right now. So they're going to have to do something no matter what, even if it's just having money going into the season to safeguard against injuries, as we know. Still, maybe some restructures coming. It depends on what the market offers them to improve this roster for the upcoming season. In the meantime, folks, over on YouTube at One Giant Podcast, over on X at One Giant Podcast, at AMAC214, and at Adam Armbrecht, give us a follow, a subscription, a like, promote it to all your friends and family, and on those podcast feeds where you get those needs fulfilled. Until next time, until those post June 1 ties, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.